Sunday dinner at the family house had turned into Megan's wedding planning committee. The dining room table was covered with venue brochures, catering menus, and Pinterest printouts of elaborate floral arrangements that cost more than most people's cars. The Belmont estate is absolutely perfect, Megan gushed, showing everyone photos on her phone. The ceremony space holds 300 guests, and the reception hall has these gorgeous crystal chandeliers. It's what you deserve, sweetheart, Mom said, squeezing Megan's hand. Your special day should be everything you've dreamed of. The only problem is the cost, Dad said, pulling out a calculator. The venue alone is $45,000, plus catering, flowers, photography, the dress. We're looking at about $120,000 total. That's a lot of money, Uncle Pete observed, looking uncomfortable. Which brings us to our announcement, Dad said, standing up dramatically. Your mother and I have made a decision. He gestured grandly around the room. We're selling this house to fund Megan's dream wedding. The family erupted in applause. Megan started crying tears of joy. Mom beamed like they'd just announced a Nobel Prize. You'd do that for me? Megan sobbed dramatically. Sell your home. Family is everything, Dad declared. This house has served its purpose. Now it's time for it to serve yours. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, watching my family plan to sell my house to fund my sister's wedding. The house they were so generously offering to sacrifice was a Victorian I'd purchased 18 months ago through my consulting business. What my family didn't know was that when I'd bought the property, I'd invited them to live there rent-free while they got back on their feet after Dad's business bankruptcy. How much do you think the house will sell for? Asked Aunt Linda. Real estate agent thinks around $750,000, Dad replied confidently. Maybe more in this market. More than enough for the wedding and some left over. That's so generous, Cousin Sarah said admiringly. Most parents don't make sacrifices like that. When did you put it on the market? Uncle Pete asked. We're meeting with realtors this week, Mom said. We want to move fast so we can book the Belmont estate before someone else takes Megan's date. I finally found my voice. That's interesting timing. Have you checked the property deed recently? Dad looked confused. What do you mean? We've owned this house for 15 years. Actually, I said carefully, I think there might be some confusion about the current ownership status. What are you talking about, Alex? Megan snapped, annoyed that anything was interfering with her wedding planning euphoria. Of course Mom and Dad own the house. It's complicated, I said, pulling out my phone. I should probably call my real estate attorney to clarify some things. Your real estate attorney? Dad laughed. Alex, you rent an apartment downtown. Why would you have a real estate attorney? Let me just make a quick call, I said, stepping into the kitchen. The truth was that 18 months ago, my parents had been facing foreclosure on their original house due to Dad's failed restaurant investments. They'd been too proud to ask for help directly, but I'd overheard Mom crying on the phone about losing their home. So I'd purchased this Victorian through my LC, then told my parents I'd found them a house-sitting opportunity for some wealthy clients who traveled frequently. They'd moved in gratefully, believing they were temporary caretakers for absent homeowners. What they didn't realize was that they already lived in a house I owned, and I had no intention of selling it to fund Megan's extravagant wedding. Michael, I said when my attorney answered. It's Alex Chin. I need you to prepare some ownership documentation for the Victorian property. My family is planning to sell it. Sell your house. I thought your parents were living there. They are. But they think they own it. And they think they can sell it to pay for my sister's wedding. Oh, that's complicated. Want me to bring the deed and ownership papers over? That would be helpful. They're having a wedding planning meeting right now. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I returned to the dining room where the wedding planning had intensified. Megan was on the phone with the Belmont estate, apparently putting down a deposit. Yes, we can do a wire transfer tomorrow, she was saying. My parents are selling their house to fund the wedding. Megan, I said quietly, you might want to hold off on any deposits until we clarify the property ownership situation. Alex, stop being negative, Mom scolded. This is Megan's special day. Dad waved dismissively. We own the house, we can sell the house. It's that simple. The deed might tell a different story, I said. 20 minutes later the doorbell rang. Michael Torres, my real estate attorney, stood on the porch with a leather briefcase. Alex Chin, he said formally. I have the property documentation you requested. Come in, I said, leading him to the dining room where my family was still deep in wedding planning. Everyone, this is Michael Torres, my real estate attorney, I announced. He brought some documents that might clarify the ownership situation. Michael opened his briefcase and spread several official documents across the table, displacing the wedding venue brochures. I understand there's some confusion about property ownership, Michael said in his lawyer voice. These documents should resolve any questions. He placed the deed front and center. This is the official property deed for this address. As you can see, the house is owned by Chin Holdings LLC. Dad leaned forward, studying the document. Chin Holdings? I've never heard of that company. Chin Holdings LLC was established 18 months ago, Michael explained. The sole member and manager is Alex Chin. The room went completely silent. Alex owns the house? Mom whispered. According to all legal documents, yes, Michael confirmed. The property was purchased in cash through the LLC in March of 2022. Megan was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You own this house. The house we're living in. I bought it when you were facing foreclosure on your old place, I said simply. I told you it was a house-sitting arrangement because I knew you wouldn't accept direct help. But we've been making improvements, paying for maintenance. Dad protested. Which I've been reimbursing through the owner's account, I said. Every receipt you've submitted for house repairs has been paid by me. Michael pulled out more documents. Here are bank records showing monthly payments to cover property taxes, insurance and maintenance. All funded by Mr. Chen's business accounts. You've been paying for everything? Mom asked, her voice barely audible. The mortgage, utilities, property taxes, home insurance, lawn service, all of it, Michael confirmed. Uncle Pete was shaking his head slowly. So Alex has been letting you live here rent-free while paying all the expenses, and you thought you owned the house? We had no idea, Dad said weakly. Which brings us to the current situation, Michael continued. The property cannot be sold without the consent of the actual owner. Megan's face had gone from bridal glow to ashen gray. So we can't sell the house for the wedding? Only Alex can authorize a sale of his property, Michael stated matter-of-factly. But the deposit? Megan said frantically. I just put down $15,000 on the venue. I told them we were selling the house. Did you write a check? I asked. Dad's checking account, she said, looking panicked. Dad was already on his phone checking his bank balance. The account only has about $8,000. The check is going to bounce. The room erupted in chaos. Megan started crying, not tears of joy this time. Mom looked mortified. Dad was frantically calling the bank. Alex, Mom said, tears in her eyes, we had no idea. We would never have presumed to sell your house. I know, I said. That's why I created the story about house sitting. I wanted you to have a stable place to live without feeling like charity. But why didn't you tell us the truth? Dad asked. Because every time I tried to help directly, you refused. Remember when I offered to help with the foreclosure? You said you wouldn't take handouts from your kid. You were investing in a home, I said. Just not legally your home. Megan was still on the phone with the venue, trying to explain why their deposit check would bounce. The conversation was not going well. Alex, she said after hanging up, could you possibly consider selling the house for the wedding? For $120,000 so you can have crystal chandeliers and 300 guests? I asked. It's my dream wedding, she said. And this is my house, I replied. That I bought to give you all a stable place to live. Michael cleared his throat. There is one option. Alex could sell the house and use the proceeds however he chooses. But it would mean finding new housing for the current residents. You'd kick us out? Mom asked. I'd give you time to find a place, I said. But yes, if I sold the house you'd need to move. The reality was setting in. They could have their dream wedding but they'd lose the house they'd come to love. What if we scaled back the wedding? Megan asked hopefully. Something smaller? How much smaller? I asked. Maybe 50 guests instead of 300? A restaurant instead of the Belmont estate? We could do the whole thing for maybe $20,000. That's more reasonable, I said. But the money wouldn't come from selling my house. Then where would it come from? Dad asked. My business income, I said. You'd pay for Megan's wedding? Mom asked. A reasonable wedding, yes. Not a $120,000 extravaganza that requires selling my house. Megan looked disappointed but relieved. So I can still get married? You can still get married. Just not at the Belmont estate with 300 guests. Alex, Dad said finally, we owe you an enormous apology. We had no idea you'd been supporting us this whole time. But why all the secrecy? Megan asked. Why not just tell us you were successful enough to help? Because you needed to maintain your dignity, I said. Dad couldn't accept help from his kid. Even when family acts ungrateful and tries to sell your house for a wedding? Megan asked. Even then, I said. Though maybe we should establish ground rules about financial decisions. Like checking with the actual homeowner before putting the house on the market? Good start. 2 months later, Megan had a beautiful wedding at a country club with 75 guests. I covered the cost. My parents still live in the Victorian but know their guests. They've stopped assuming they can sell property they don't own. The venue deposit never bounced because I covered Dad's account. But when Michael Torres arrived with deeds, everything changed. My family learned their house was my gift. Wedding dreams crashed but relationships landed on solid ground.